Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development, with your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm your host, Scott Babcock, and I'm here today with both of my counterparts, Daniel Mendonca and Sabrina Pontoni, our producer extraordinaire, and hopefully she has her volume turned down because she's been blowing out our eardrums every time she hits the mic, but she's got to talk today. So hopefully she can keep some of her excitement on, take it down to like a 9 instead of a 10 as well. So, but we're here today. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing well, Scott. Happy to be here. You know, it's always a fun episode when Sabrina joins. You know, for some reason they're typically higher listened to. I'm not sure why.
You'd think we'd put her on more often.
I forced all my family to listen. I pulled them all
there
in.
it is. There it is.
Got it.
How you doing, Sabrina?
I'm good. I don't want to scream too loud, but I'm good. Excited to be back for a little Q&A.
That's it. We're going to do a little mailbag episode here today. You guys usually probably know that when Sabrina hits the mics, that's what we're up to. Is we've got a few questions that have come in, and we haven't done one of these in a while, so it should be fun to get some of these collaborated and think back to some of the episodes where we might have talked about some of these topics. But we're going to do a little mailbag. That's not the word. Let's do a little mailbag, and we'll get you some answers. Hopefully you can take back to your work. All right, Sabrina, what's our first question on the docket?
All right, so first up, what kind of questions should someone ask when they're shopping for an LMS? So what maybe top 3 things should they keep in mind or things they ask?
You know, when you say shopping for an LMS, I just picture someone going through this software store and like with the little cart and they're just, you know, looking to pick things off the shelf. But yeah, when someone's looking for an LMS, the one thing that I think the questions they should ask is definitely about service level, and this is where I would always start is you know, you're not just buying a piece of software, you're buying the support behind it, because it's inevitable that you're going to have issues, going to have technical issues, and other things. So I always encourage, and I always try to, when I'm talking from the sales perspective, I always try to give information around our service levels and what we can provide to help support the client that is looking for our product.
It is funny that you mentioned like the marketplace. People in a grocery store are going, "Oh, I'll take a little bit of required training. I'll take a little bit of fun. I'll take a little e-learning," and you're just building things together. But yeah, I'll say the first question you probably need to ask is probably internal. I know that's probably not the question here, but it will lead to the questions you're ultimately going to ask. But it's, how do you want to use the platform itself? Like, because I think there's tremendous diversity in the world of any platform that's related to learning. Are you focused more on compliance? Is this an audit tool for you? Is this something you're looking to get people to have fun and engage? Is this a talent management type of experience where you're trying to get people focused on what's next in their career and trying to, you know, help retain people long term? So then you're talking about learning paths. I think internally, you need to answer a lot of those questions before you're ever going to get to a place where you can start to really seek out the right partner when it comes to what your platform needs to be. So I don't know. I probably turned that around a little bit. It's not necessarily during the shopping, but you almost need to. And I like a good analogy, so let's go back to it. When I go to the grocery store, I need to make a checklist of all the things I need to pick up, because otherwise I'm going to start wandering the store and buying a bunch of stuff I didn't need anyway. Sure, I need a car heater, electric blanket or something, which, you know, had nothing to do with me making chili for the weekend or so. I always start with a good checklist. A lot of that has to be, what do I have in the house? What do I need to get? What do I want to accomplish? What am I trying to make? So if we're going to carry this marketplace grocery store analogy out a lot more, like I would start with, I need to build my own checklist so I can ask the right questions. But I think that comes with you kind of answering some of your own thoughts on how you want to use the platform. That'd be my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. One of the things that comes up a lot is the reality of it is all of LMSs out there, or other softwares out there, but LMSs in this case, they have a lot of very similar features. But in a lot of cases, the features aren't necessarily used to do the same things. So not only do you want to create a feature checklist, you want to create a goal and objective checklist and understand how you expect or desire your user to use the platform, and create some user scenarios. And so you can ask questions about specific scenarios. If you're targeting external users and for brand advocacy purposes, asking the question of how an external user find this piece of content and be incentivized to take it, and learn those scenarios and see if it checks those boxes. So making sure you understand your scenarios and asking scenario related questions. That way you're not just checking a box on a feature and maybe it doesn't actually integrate or function the way your organization thought it would.
How can a good training platform increase sales associates' motivation to sell more product?
I think Daniel touched on it briefly there, or at least said the words, but and we've talked about in our past episodes that as a sales associate or someone who's going to be, and maybe it's not even sales, but it's around anyone who's going to represent you or your brand or your product or your services. So anyone who's going to be having that kind of a role, an LMS is a great way to build that brand advocacy and encourage people to be representatives of your brand in a way that you want them to show up, to get excited about being an advocate for your brand, to represent you, to speak on behalf of what you offer, to tell people about it, to get people excited about it. If you can find a way to bring that energy through training, through knowledge and experience, familiarity, then I think ultimately those people are going to go out and be more productive. They're going to find that way to want to sell or want to represent your brand in a more meaningful way. And I think an LMS is a great way to do that.
Yeah, I think familiarity is a great point, Scott, and an LMS and providing training on employees is the reality of it is when you think about this simply from a life perspective. When you are with your group of friends or a group of people and there's a debate about sports or your favorite reality TV show or whatever that is, you only typically speak about the things you feel really confident about. So you're not going to have conversations around products you don't understand or products you aren't familiar with because you can be left to look stupid or unknowledgeable or things of that sort. So by having a training platform where you can educate the people who represent your brand in person, in store, and enhance the buying experience, it allows people to feel comfortable about your product and be able to have that conversation. The same way you do about stats. Someone asked me one day, if I am big into basketball, and I actually started following basketball just so I could have conversations with a coworker who really likes basketball. I also like to prove him wrong about things and bug him about stuff, but I was comfortable with it at that point that I could have a conversation about it. And I think that's big, is making those individuals comfortable talking about your product, and they're more likely to talk about it to the customer and recommend it. And we all know that the statistics that people are way more likely, about 70% more likely to buy a product when it's recommended by someone they trust or rely on for information.
Yeah, and look, my 9 and 7-year-old are the antithesis of this entire argument. They will argue about it, stuff they have no idea what's going on about. But I think that's the joy of youth, is that they're unabashed about stuff like that. But as we get older, uh, you'll start to speak on things that you feel comfortable with, to Daniel's point. That makes you knowledgeable. And I think as adults, we also recognize someone who understands what's going on. Um, and if you've got a product that you're not training on, or maybe it's getting older in its life cycle and people are forgetting about what it is or how it compares to the new stuff, that stuff's just not going to get recommended as often by your salespeople. So the more you have a depth and breadth of knowledge that expands that, lets people feel more comfortable about it, the more they're going to bring it up, the more they're going to talk about it with customers and clients. And if they have that information and not just a spec sheet, right? It's got to be a deep familiarity with that product. So expanding beyond the 101 and really going on to the 201s and 301s of really how this can be used, explaining the advantages and things like that. That stuff's going to come up. You're going to feel more confident in doing it. Your clients are going to recognize that more. And ultimately that is the goal when you're talking about brand advocacy, is someone who's going to go out and speak on behalf of what you offer.
Question number 3. What is the one belief about virtual events that you tend to correct when first meeting with clients?
I love this question because it's where I spend almost all my days as of late. Doing a ton of virtual events lately, and they're always, the first thing we always talk about is that your virtual event isn't your live event. And simply put, that sounds like it's on the on the face of it is very obvious, but for a lot of folks that they're maybe going into their first virtual event, or they're going into a virtual event that catered to a live event audience, and they're not as familiar with what we do, I guess, at least. And the reality is you're not constrained. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. You're not constrained by physical like location. You're not bound by the world of physics. Ultimately, even when you're in a virtual space, and you can put a lot of that stuff away and say it's okay to do things completely different in a virtual world because you have so many more options. So you don't have to be in a hotel lobby or a ballroom. I think we've talked about some of this. You can have an under the sea adventure, or you can put it in the middle of the jungle, or you can go into outer space. You can put it in a fictional world of orcs and dwarves and make it Lord of the Rings if you want. So we talk a lot about that your creativity ultimately isn't bound to the place where you're going to hold an event like it is at a live event. In a virtual world, you have so many more options to kind of truthfully have fun with the elements of it. And that ultimately, the reason we push for that so much is that ultimately that's all about the engagement. When you're talking about a virtual event, your users are sitting at home typically on a computer screen, and how are you going to keep them from wandering off to get coffee or go do their laundry or run to Starbucks or whatever? And a lot of that is you have to treat it as, in a little bit, you have to treat it more like a game. You have to put some fun elements, let them have their creativity and their imagination run wild, and realize that living in this virtual world for a little bit is going to be something engaging and fun for them.
That's a great comment, Scott. And I know you. I was going to say you should probably start this one off because this is the world you've been living in pretty much for the past 18 months. I'll just add a little piece to that because I typically interact with the customer, the potential customer, earlier in the process. And I would say that the number one belief is that, and you said it, but the experience is not the same. So just like changing the interaction points, the creativity, the environment they're in, I think you really have to define more clearly what the goals and objectives of the event are holistically, and go about that. That way they understand that, just like you said, your virtual event is not your in-person event.
We can make the analogy and drop back to LMSs too, since we've been talking about that a little bit, and we've mentioned things like enterprise versus extended enterprise, and which is basically, are you training your own employees or are you training a group of individuals that is out there that represents you on some part, right? And you need to reach them with training. Well, a virtual event is like an extended enterprise event, and a live event is much like an enterprise event. And simply what I mean by that is the live event, you have a captive audience. They traveled to where you are to attend to the thing you are doing. So they're more likely to put butts in seats and sit through the lectures and all of that because they invested time, resources, all of this to get to you. In a virtual environment, they have the real world distractions all around them, and you need to entice them to stay, truthfully. Even in these events where you might have your own employees attending virtually and you can say, well, look, it's required and all of this. And yes, it is. It's really, you can get them to log in and you can get them to launch the video, but if it's not engaging to stay, they can still leave the screen up, and you don't really have too many touch points typically to know whether or not they're really engaged, where they're not wandering off to go talk to the neighbors or go check the mailbox or whatever in the middle of your keynote speech. So, but if you find ways to make it engaging and fun, they'll stick around, they'll stay, and truthfully, they're more motivated than sometimes we give them credit for on the virtual side. So those are all ways to just think about that your virtual world is, the platform is in the computer screen, and you want people to stay and enjoy that in some way. And sometimes that takes suspending some of like the way you've historically done your live events.
All right, so now we're going to switch to adult learning theory question. So why do you guys think it's important for instructional designers to know about adult learning theory and understand it?
Yeah, I can kick us off there, Scott. It's really important because understanding your audience when creating content or courses, and executing on the learning objectives that are a client, or if you're an internal instructional designer, your internal client is important to in order to effectively change the behavior or provide the knowledge or deliver the information or whatever is requested of you. So understanding things like that, you're going to have to answer the question of what's in it for me. And that's going to have to come across that way. A user who may already have predetermined beliefs and predetermined knowledge about something knows why they're taking the training and what's in it for them and how it's going to benefit their role. So using that example, it's important to understand that, because without it, I don't think you can execute an effective course without understanding that adult learning theory to know how to approach the trainer or the trainee of a learning.
Yeah, we haven't said the word too often in many podcasts recently, but I'm going to bring it back up. When you're talking about your objectives, which is what an instructional designer, I have a lot of trouble speaking today, is really focused on. Understanding the person who's going to be reading those objectives, executing on those objectives, and ultimately achieving those objectives, I think is important, and it ultimately frames the rest of your course. And it can be anything from understanding what their motivations are. So Dana talked about like the what's in it for me, but it can be how they absorb content and understanding the way you might start to script and write out your materials in a way that assumes some pre-experience or absorbed knowledge from those users, possibly from courses they've already written. That it doesn't always need to be as explicit in terms of step by step. You're going to have them draw some conclusions that will help them make connections and sort of strategically think things through. So I think it opens your doors a lot to understand the techniques you might want to use. But yeah, it all starts with that audience and how you're writing objectives for that audience. And if you understand those things and the way they're going to consume content, that will improve your writing and your course development.
Question number 5. This is a little bit of a broader question, but why should an organization invest in their learning and development department?
So having been in the learning and development field for so long, I think this is always an uphill battle for every learning and development team, in that there's always a lack of funding, because learning and development is this objective subjective battle. Is it really important? Does it really hit the bottom line? And sometimes it's the measurement task ahead of what is there, is that it's really hard to say learning is the sole thing that made our revenue increase or our margin increase or our productivity go up or our inefficiencies decrease, all of that stuff. And when you start to talk about things like logistics and operations and headwinds in a market, right? Like, so right now, strange things are happening all around the world with the inability to ship things and the inability to produce plastics and all of this that can cause inventory constraints, which can ultimately affect your sales and has nothing to do with how well you trained somebody. The measurement on training is always so hard, but ask any Fortune 100 CEO if it's cool to just stop training your employees. And I guarantee your answer from every CEO and business owner on the planet, not just the Fortune 100 ones, they're going to say, well, no, our people need training. So if you follow that logical conclusion through, that people need to be trained to do their jobs, how well we can measure it, we can debate. But no one says training isn't important, that we could just cut it. You got to start investing in it, and you got to give people that opportunity to really execute in a way that is meaningful for them. So I feel for the people in the L&D departments, because I've been there and trying to scrounge together every last nickel and penny sometimes to get content built or to get a program launched. So from my perspective, I think you need to develop people, because that ultimately is going to help you retain people, train people, be more efficient, and just it's my bleeding heart hoping for more development of all people.
Yeah, I'll add in, I'll use a story to address this. So there's an article about the North American division the European division of Johnson & Johnson, I believe was the company. So forgive me if I'm wrong there. But when asked what the learning and development department's goal for 2021 was, their goal was to eliminate distractions. And I use that as an example is because, we think about training employees in their process or training the employees on the product, but we don't talk about big hurdles that we are all engaging with and how learning and development can help solve them. So using an example, I think we all in the remote work world we've been put in the past 18 months have increased levels of distractions, whether it's your dog running at your feet or snoring beneath you. Scott knows about that one. Whether it's a kid who is homesick and who with a runny nose, and they wouldn't typically be homesick when it's not COVID or a pandemic going on. There's just additional distractions, and everything that this learning and development department is doing is focused around eliminating distractions to help their employees be more efficient, and in turn allow them to be happier in their role and less stressed out. That's their whole initiative, and everything they're doing around that is focused for that. So, using that as an example, I think investing in your L&D department is investing in your ability to make your business more efficient and more effective. And I think, if someone told you that you could invest in your learning and development department and you would increase efficiency by 10% or 15%, I feel like a lot of operations teams would say yes to that. So that's why I think people should invest in their L&D departments, because they do have the ability to move the needle with with your business objectives.
If we go back to one of our earlier questions, right, and we talk about what makes sales associates more motivated, and I said don't just restrict it to sales associates. It's all the people who represent your business on some level to someone else, whether it's internal partners, external partners, clients, customers, whoever, right? Having a training department that gives you the resources and the tools and has the ability to deliver those things, right, which is where the investment comes in. I have the ability to create training, get the right resources, the right people in place. Ultimately is going to make more confident employees, and more confident employees are going to represent and be more productive. They're going to feel more comfortable in their roles. They're going to feel supported. And ultimately that's going to improve your business's productivity on whatever it is your business does, whether it's sales or whether it's services or whether it's manufacturing or healthcare or hospitality management or whatever. The reality is that training department ultimately facilitates comfort and confidence in your teams. I think that's a reason to invest as well. So I don't know. We're probably preaching to the choir on anyone who's listening to our podcast is all L&D fans, but maybe that helps you make some of the arguments with anyone who might be making decisions on behalf of what your investment strategies look like. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, so for the last question, this is more of a fun question. There's no limits. Imagine wherever your head goes. Who is your dream guest to have on the podcast and why?
I have so many. So I'll start with a one we absolutely can't get, unfortunately. I would have loved to have been able to, at some point in my life, probably even just been in the room with someone who's interviewing, but to have the actual ability to talk to Robin Williams, I think would have been like an amazing hour of just gut busting laughter would be my guess. And just watching him on nightly TV when he was doing Leno or Carson or whoever, right? Like those were some of my favorite interviews, just because it was wild and it was crazy and it was eclectic and such a talent, and so that would have been fun for me on a purely like entertainment level. In terms of current guests, I can think of two people that I would love to interview. One, I would love to interview Ryan Reynolds, or have him on for a couple reasons. One, I also think he's incredibly funny. He's smart and witty and all of that, but I also just his marketing and entrepreneurship, his ability to start up companies and make them successful, and really crazy advertising and just some of that I would love to get kind of behind the head of how he goes about picking and choosing what he wants to work on. So I think that would be a really fun interview personally. And then if I could have another one, this is the nerd in me, I would choose Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I think for our podcast is probably the more appropriate guest in many ways, because he's very focused on making sure people are science literate and that you're finding learning and in the things that happen in life. I think he's also a really articulate guy in terms of the geek world or the nerd world, who kind of helps promote that energy around learning and science and everything else. So for me, those would be, I know that's more than one and a few options. And so if you are listening, Neil or Ryan, please reach out to us on our social media. I would love to have you on. And yeah, or if anyone knows them, hey, just throw us a note.
Those are some good options, Scott. I'm going to go my first one. I have two. My first one is a fictional character.
Ooh, nice.
Which should excite things up. It is Ted Lasso. I'm not sure if anybody here has seen Ted Lasso on Apple TV Plus, but if you haven't, I'm a strong believer that it is the best show on television. 100%, and it's also a soccer or football related show, so that it scratches that coaching itch for me as well. I think it would be a great interview. My second, that I'd be really interested in interviewing, and maybe people don't disagree with me, but I think I would want to interview Kevin Feige, the chairman and CEO of Marvel Studios. I think that what he's done and what he continues to do there is mind blowing to me, and I've become a massive Marvel nerd with the MCU, and I think it would be amazing to hear how he's piecing this universe together. Because even when you hear the actors and actresses talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they always say that Kevin Feige is a genius, and he's just so creative, and his ability to imagine is amazing. So I hope one day they make an Imagineering or some sort of show on Disney Plus that talks about the evolution of the MCU. But yeah, those are my two. I have another one just popped in my head, but it's very soccer specific, and he really only speaks. He doesn't speak very good English, so maybe we won't have Pep Guardiola on the show. But here we are.
It'll be an interesting 10 minutes while we try to decipher our own thoughts there. But no, Kevin Feige would be really cool. Partially just I'm amazed at how he's imagined this universe over an extended period of time. Just the forethought that goes into some of that, and the planning is really cool. But also the fact that he's taking characters that most of us have never heard of, and turned them into relevant pop culture icons. Like that ability to weave that narrative of, unless you were super into some of these comic book series, some of these are names you've never heard of, but he's found ways to make them not just relevant, but really, really popular and relatable. Like he's tied them all into a universe that is very seamless. So mind blowing to think about some of that, because I'm not sure my brain could manage all of the different loops and twists and turns that have to be kind of managed to think through that. So good choices, Daniel. Good choices.
You as well, Scott.
Thanks. A little positive reinforcement for both of us today. Sabrina, if you could have somebody on, so we got the producer on today, huh? Let's throw the question back at her a little bit. Ryan Reynolds, I'm sure, is probably also at the top of your list. I'm sure
Ryan Reynolds is dreamy.
Oh,
I would leave my wife for. Ryan Reynolds, top of the list.
My eyes, Ryan Reynolds is up there. Maybe I'd have his wife.
We could have both.
Lively, big fan of her.
Maybe we could do a little couples interview. There we go.
We can have like a.
Anyone else you'd put on the list, Sabrina?
You know what? This is like not anyone inspirational, kind of controversial to be honest, but someone in the podcast world who I'd love to pick their brain, Logan Paul.
All right.
I think
he's a genius too. Like with everything he's done with social media and marketing. It's not the most intelligent answer, but it's someone that I listen to weekly. So
hey, we all got it.
Yeah. Probably
there we go. All right. Well, so we have a huge guest list lined up. We'll see if any of them call us back now. So
hopefully the producer gets to work, start sending those DMs.
There we go.
Come on.
All right, everybody, it's time to get happy. We do this at the end of every show. Spread a little positivity, a little energy back to the audience, the listeners. Let them know about what's going on in our world that we're pretty excited about, or finding some energy on our own. So I'm going to kick it off. I think Daniel got to mention this a few weeks ago for himself, that fall was sort of in the air, and he was feeling some of that transition. Well, Tennessee is definitely south, and so we're a little behind in terms of the weather on that front, but it is finally feeling a bit like fall. So our highs are getting down into the 70s and 60s, and our overnights are dipping a little bit. So I feel like we're actually getting a little seasonal change here. I'm getting to wear sweatshirts again, which is just a cozy feeling for me, and not sweating on most days. So really excited about that. Just fall is here a little bit. It never lasts super long in Tennessee. That season's always a little shorter along with spring, but just excited for a little change in the weather. So
awesome, Scott. That's a good one. Mine is I haven't talked about Oakley in a little bit. My little girl's growing up. She is fully into daycare, and yesterday last week was the first time she'd actually talked about anything that goes on at daycare to us. And I dropped her off yesterday morning, and we're standing in the entryway, and she turns around, and another mom and a little boy hop out of the car behind us, and she goes, Jace, hi, Jace. And she talks to Jace and says hi, and there's this little boy, and the dad in me, that was my first moment where I wanted to end the little boy's day and make sure he stays away from my daughter. A little overprotective, but I'll get over that, I'm sure. But what my positivity point is, my daughter's got friends that she talks about now at daycare, and a whole social circle that I know nothing about. So that was my first moment, and it's just so cute. She talks about her friends Jackson and Freya and Jace, and it's pretty cute. And we ask her how daycare was and who's at daycare. She always says friends. So it's really cute, and it warms my heart.
They grow up. Before you know it, you'll be getting. I'll be curious to see. I think every generation probably goes through a slight difference in this, but how you get your first play date request that isn't like a friend of yours. So with Mason, he brought home a handwritten note from the dad of his best friend West at the time, asking if they could have a sleepover / play date, whatever. And it was real weird when it first comes over. He's like, "Who's this guy writing me?" It turns out not only is Mason best friends with West, but Greg is also, who's been on the podcast, one of my really good friends now. So it actually sparked a double friendship. Little happy note there. But with Oliver, it was a text message from a mom. I don't even know how she got her phone number. A little weird being like, "Hey, this is so and so. Tim wants to play," or whatever. But so apparently Oliver gave a phone number out. Our phone number out to somebody, and that's how we got that one. So just wait, Daniel. It's not that far off. They'll be bringing home a request to go play at other kids' houses and leave the neighborhood, and they branch out real quick.
It's gonna be crazy.
All right, that will do it for us today. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendonça. She's Sabrina Pontoni, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.